Magdalena, thank you so much for this huge submission here, the very first grade 8 submission we've had at the Academy. You've done yourself an absolute credit in the work you put in here and the Academy too, so thank you on behalf of all of us for raising the bar and showing us what it looks like here at grade 8 and the incredible amount of work and dedication you've put into it. I think you've done an excellent job. I thought in particular the practice routine was outstanding. I watched the performance of your repertoire sort of once and then skipped around multiple times, listening to different things and listening to different moments. And then I listened to the practice routine and it was very, very revealing because I have a lot to say about the repertoire. I'm very happy with the practice routine. There's very little in there that I think needs addressing in terms of technique. I think you did such an excellent job. You played so rhythmically with the metronome. And also just wanted to point out, because it sounds like you're going to keep working with it, that each group of 5 practice routines was conceived, well, actually it's more 6 through 10, 11 through 15, and 16 through 20. They were conceived as groups of 5, and with the idea that you learn all of them, and they rotate throughout the days of the week, or every other day, whatever it might be, but they rotate so that you can have kind of a balanced diet of practice and technique. So don't just know that if you go back and learn 19 and 18 and 17 and 16, that will actually make a really nice set that will also keep up the variety of your practice while also improving. They are now structured in a more progressive manner, but they do interlock and complement one another so that you're building on different techniques throughout the different practice routines. I really was impressed. I mean, for those watching at home, let's just sort of bask in the glory of some of these. There really are some challenging scale sets and variations. Thirds, sixths, and then some speed. Listen to this. I'm saying listen to this because I know other people other than you, Magdalena, will most likely be watching this. It's just really impressive. It really is. And all the different variants and the clarity and the execution of the practice routine was, of course there's going to be little stumbles up at the high positions. Maybe that's something to continue working on. High positions are just difficult because we so rarely access them. One person that's actually very, very good at high position playing is Ben Verdery, and he writes a lot of music up there. He plays a lot of music up there. So I think the key to really getting accuracy in the higher positions is to spend more time there. So perhaps, the shifting is one aspect of these larger scales, but playing up in higher positions is another. So you might just want to spend some more time up there. You could actually just play some scales solely in high positions, just getting used to the spacing and the feel up there. I know when I started playing mandolin that my fingers really weren't used to the small spacing of the frets, but the more and more you play, it just suddenly feels much more at home, whereas before you're looking at these tiny frets up high on the mandolin going, how could anyone ever play on those? But it is possible. So I think spending time up in those higher positions will be really key to getting accuracy and fluidity and comfort there. I want to spend, seeing as I want to spend most of the time on the repertoire, let's have a look at your composition. Now, this was a very interesting exercise, in part because you were doing it without a sort of replete set of tools that are still being, will still be added to grade 8. So thank you for taking the plunge there. And you've composed something that's very, very beautiful. I like it a lot. Just on my own personal opinion of it, I really enjoy it. It's got a pastoral dirge-like quality, and that comes from a lot of the 1/5 movement in the bass and the pulse of the half notes that you have. I really like a few. Let's just go through it a little bit. That's lovely. It's a lovely cadence there to is that you have a really innate sense of phrasing, nice 2 bars, and then also this larger phrase, you know, it's sort of ending on the 4 chord there. And then you also have slightly irregular durations of phrases. So a lot of standard phrases go for 8 bars, and this is sounding like 2 plus 2 plus 2. But then the resolution, well, I guess you could say on the 8th bar there's a G major resolution. But the nice thing is, like a lot of good composers do, it doesn't give you the feeling of, okay, now we're sort of finished now. You keep going, especially with the addition of the new rhythm. Lovely chord there. So what I mean, so that resolution comes there on bar 15. So, you know, normally it would be on 16. That if you're ever sort of wondering, you know, part of this process is not just composing, but also understanding the music we play, because by digging into it and doing it ourselves, we get a greater understanding of what we're working with. And like you said, that you've sort of taken some inspiration from Bach's the Bach prelude. So, you know, there's a slightly odd number of measures in terms of phrasing compared to standard classical period or romantic period phrasing, but that can be very nice to play around with that, because we play around with expectations. What was nice here as well is that you used the bass line to be active while the upper line had a sustained sort of finalization of their phrase. Nice imperfect cadence, they're sort of ending on a 5 chord. And, you know, I take it this is, you know, we see the introduction of a C sharp there as it sort of ends. It still feels like it ends on a 5 chord there, so I've got sort of an open question that wants to be resolved back to G major. I don't feel that we've really established a key center of D, and then it continues on in D. So this is sort of, we're looking at modulation here to the dominant. It's probably a little bit, you know, when we modulate, we really want to reinforce the key center. So adding in a C sharp and then going to D is giving us sort of the inkling that it's going to go to D major, but often it's used in the way you use it, just kind of as a coloring. But as you start the next area in D, it's like you're indicating, oh, now we're in D. So a way to perhaps further reinforce a key center like that would be or actually, so that would, to play an A chord, the dominant of D major, that would further establish the key of D, if in fact that's what you were looking to do. So the C sharp is great, but marrying it also with an A major chord would be great. And then perhaps leaving this chord here at 21 on an A major. So and then we're now in D major. So that's kind of how we fully would engage into a new key with a modulation. And the chord that would get us there is the 5 of the 5. So D major is going to be the 5 of G major, but we need the 5 of D major, which is A major, to really get us into D major and feel us and announce more clearly that we're into another key signature. Oh, yeah. Again, a lovely movement to the 4, the harmony of the 4, and good use of range here, going up into the higher range of the music. This is the highest point of the music. Very expressive moments and lots of potential there. Now here's some material. So this is where I'd get into what I'd like to see more out of this. And honestly, I would spend more time on this and develop it out, because you've got a really lovely sound world you've created here. What I love is, like I mentioned at 15, these bass notes that come in and start moving. And then at 28 here, I would love to hear more movement in the other voices. Your bass line is relatively static throughout. There are a couple of nice quarter note movements, but you start to introduce it here. Like there would be a nice opportunity to go. Just really having a conversation, we get more polyphony. That's where I would love to hear this piece delve into a bit more, and it starts sounding almost a bit more Renaissance-like, with this kind of almost modern Americana harmony of using the 4 chord like that. I think that would be really interesting. And when we do have movement in the other parts, look for stepwise movement. So you have a couple of, up in measure 8, you've got this nice moment, G. Maybe you do lovely stepwise movement in the melody, but very seldom do you use it in the other parts. Well, that's what I'd be looking for. Lots of opportunities as well. Even measure 32, you've got an F sharp. You could walk it up to the A. You could go, that little move there, and that would be a nice way to bring in your dotted rhythm. That kind of thing, right? So at the third beat of 32, instead of just having, we could have that kind of movement, and it's going to create a really lovely interaction between the voices. 2 more things I would look into. I like the harmonies a lot. The 4 chords, very beautiful, but we need to think a little bit cadentially, and as in the movement of the harmony and the direction. So one good example is the modulation to D major at 22. And don't forget that we have melody and range to work with, but also the harmonic tension and color I think could be played around with a little more. You've made good use of 1, 4, and 5. I wonder what other chords we could do, or maybe what other colors we could add to some of these chords. I think the most colorful moment is around 23. We get the major 7 sound, right? So this is 22. So we get this lovely, you get actually, you might want to include at 22 and beat 3 a D. So we get that line in the middle. And then something to lead maybe back up to the D. Little playing around with the other voices. Then finally, addressing the end section, I think we get left almost on a bit of a question here. So this starts out in G major, and then we have so here, the D7 that's introduced with the C natural really sort of indicates we're going to the G, which you do. And then it's a little bit, I'm kind of wanting a real resolution back to G, and that's kind of the ending of the prelude that you're referencing. Maybe you don't want that, but there's an opportunity. What Bach does, and that's sort of what you're imitating in the bass, is he'll stay on the 5, which you've got here, the D, but he'll then resolve it at the very end to G. So that might look something like this. I'm starting at 39. Something like that, where we modulate back to G and get a sense of arrival or return back to that home key. So something to think about there, and I would highly recommend and encourage you to stick with this piece and build it out more, because I think it's beautiful, and I think you could add this to your performance program, and it's your piece. What an exciting thing to do. So some ideas there, but very much a clear understanding of musical form and shape and variation and cadences. So I'm glad you did that. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And I hope to hear more from you with your compositions. It's really a lovely, lovely sound world you created. Okay, so let's now have a look at the playing. Now I have many things to say here. So first of all, obviously huge success in terms of the performance as a whole, 24 minutes of playing, which is substantial, and a lot of focus, a lot of memorization, a lot of virtuosity in your playing. And so that's really fantastic. And some really beautiful moments, particularly in Capriccio Arabe with the lyricism. The Bach prelude I thought was really well put together with an understanding of voices. The Piazzolla, like we actually just talked yesterday on the performance seminar about it, with the sort of energy, and many other great things. A lot of challenging pieces you've done really, really well. And also completely tangentially, I really like this setting. It's a very nice setup in that room with the lights. It's all actually very, very well framed. So bonus points for filming, because that's something I think about a lot. So I'm not going to go through bit by bit on each piece, because that's going to take a long time, and that's really a good opportunity for us to do on coaching calls and things. I really found some common threads that I'd like you to address in your playing. And the reason it was so revealing to watch your practice routine is that some of these were completely absent or, dealt with in the practice routine. So I'm very curious to understand what the difference is between your approach to repertoire compared to your approach to the practice routine. So let me give you a rundown of the things. They're not really in any order. I've just sort of gone through all the different pieces, but I would love to see more vibrato in your playing. There is some examples of vibrato, but I think you could use a lot more, and it would add a lot to your sound. Synchronization is something that I think is something you need to look into. I found particularly in the Scarlatti, sometimes in the Valse 3, the Barrios, and the Piazzolla, there's some synchronization issues, which is, we'll talk about, and it's tied in with rhythm, tempo, and everything. So the other ones I have a pulse with a sort of a bracket about sometimes waiting on beats a little bit too much, tempo choices, and rushing. So those are the things I'd like to consider. There's many great things about your playing, and I hope we've sort of covered a lot of them, but I want to dive into these because I think they'll be most useful. So vibrato, I think, is an easy one in that you can do it. I've noticed that in the Capriccio Arabe, but you don't use it very often, and I think it's a missed opportunity. It could bring a lot to your sound. Let me see if I can find some examples. Oh, my computer's not happy right now. Let's try this again. Let's reload the page. Technology. Here we go. Okay. So let's find, okay, so you did a vibrato on the very top note, D, and then also on the chord, but you kind of do one little oscillation and then stop. Like there's an example, that chord, that sustained chord could have a little very light vibrato on the chord. Again, I saw your finger move, but you don't commit to it. And it sustains more, it brings color. And so you do, it's there, so the impulse is there, but you don't carry it out for any length of time, and in general I think it's just not present enough. See there, that's a big one. It could be really wide and a little bit exaggerated, and you start the movement but you don't follow through with it, and I think this piece was the most exemplary of your use of vibrato. So that's an asterisk for you. I would love to see more work on vibrato, maybe specific practice sessions where you actively go in and find moments where you can do it and then practice it. And the real key to vibrato is going to be continuing it and through transitions. So what you're doing right now is not continuing it at all on the same note. So you need to keep it going. And then the next step will be to make sure you do it between two notes. Well, a lot of people do this. Stop, stop. So technically you've done it on both notes, but you didn't. I'm not saying do it on every note. There are obvious places that we can't do it, which are on fast passages and things, but I would say there are many, many opportunities for you to use it. Have a listen to some cello players, violin players, and you know, guitarists that do use vibrato a lot, and there's just, it really brings a richness to the sound. So that's that point. The rest, these are all kind of interrelated. So synchronization is, when I talk about that, that's basically the way the left hand and the right hand work together. And I do see problems with that in the fast passages, and the notes themselves don't speak very well. They sometimes get a bit caught, either the right hand fingers coming down too early or the left hand fingers leaving too early or arriving too early. Point is, they're not synchronized. And so, you know, I know all too well about this opening of the Scarletti, right? Right? That's a tricky opening. So there's a couple of things that go into it. One, first and foremost, is the right hand fingering. Yeah, so I slur am I. That fingering using the will allow a good string cross, M, I, across strings 1 and 2. Now let me see if you're doing that. I'm going to do something I've never done before, but I've been using it a lot on your video. You can go to YouTube and change the playback speed, and the fast pieces, it's quite handy. There's some good vibrato. Okay. Yeah, you're using your M finger, as far as I can tell. So one aspect about that might be as simple as changing your right hand fingering to make sure there's a good string cross. I know this all too well because I've worked through this as well, and it makes big difference. And you can just write an I over the one note that you need to make sure you start on it, because you can go I, and then I am I. As long as you start that first high A, then the rest of your alternation should carry you through to the correct fingering. So I sometimes just mark down the right fingering, and that micro practice is going to be where it's at. Now, the other aspect that comes into it might not be right hand fingering, although it all kind of plays, I mean, that's part of the synchronization, right? The fact that if your right hand is struggling with a string cross, then it's not going to synchronize, it's not going to hit the string at the right time, it's late, basically. I think that's what it is. So I think you're probably... or late or early. It's actually very hard to tell for me whether you can be late or early, but they're not syncing, and you get this kind of, the note gets muted. In other situations, I think that the fingers are just out of sync a little bit. And what I think one way to deal with this is to practice right hand alone in specific passages. So, you know, this would be, if we did that opening section, would be it, right? We're just playing the right hand without left hand, and what we need to practice is the rhythm of it. And then If we can't do it with the left hand, or we've really worked on the right hand, then it's a left hand problem. So that's an example of very specific work, trying to work on the synchronization, so you can metronomically work with the right hand, di da di da, di da da di da, di da da di da. And if it's perfectly on time with the metronome, which you exhibited in the practice routine, very good metronome work, then you should be able to sync it up with the left hand. But the moment something is not syncing up. So that was the most interesting thing about, and that's why I said the practice routine was so revealing, is that you did have good synchronization in the practice routine. And so I'm asking myself, why? What is it that's happening in the repertoire that's the disconnect there? Because you clearly can synchronize right and left hands. Is it perhaps the way you're working on these passages? Is it that they're obviously more complex than slightly repetitive exercises? And therefore we need to give more attention to each little transition and finger independence. I think that might be the answer. So I also went back to the practice routine and compared the tempo of this very moment to your speed trials in the practice routine. Is pretty much spot on. So you've proven in the speed trials that you can play cleanly at this tempo. So it's not that your technique is lacking, it's a synchronization issue. And so you want to work on right hand alone, then look at the left hand, and maybe there's something in the transition that's slowing you down. But this kind of work is going to be what lifts you up to another level. That's detail work, and that's looking at how you practice it, how you listen, and then sort of say, okay, that needs to be cleaner. How do I solve this problem? This is a perfect little example. How do I make the opening of this piece clean and let those notes speak? Another thing that I thought would impact your right hand there is the staccato that you played. It's kind of an aggressive movement. Have a look at the right hand as you play bum, bum, bum. Right, it's really tight. I wonder if you could somehow relax. It's a very tight note duration as well. I wonder if it could be a little longer, and maybe a more relaxed hand movement there would prepare you better for the next movements to come. I mean, you could potentially even do left hand staccato, but it's more the fact is that I wonder if it's tensing up. I think the repeat was even more tense. Nice cross string trills there, yeah. Okay, so synchronization, and that came up for me. It came up in the Valse 3 with those fast passages, and the not Villalobos, the Piazzolla. Now let's talk about pulse, and this again was revealing to watch the practice routine, because you were very, very in time with the metronome. So again, that's not something that's a deficiency in your playing. You can do that, but you often don't in the repertoire. You often deviate a lot from the pulse. It's very elastic, but within measures. So where can we have a look at this? Let's have a look at the so okay, to start off with, I want to point out something that you do rather habitually, and that is waiting on downbeats. So it's a musical effect, I think, that feels good and is effective. But if you do it on a many, many measures, we start to really lose the effect. And I think at higher speeds, we can stop listening to it. Again, I'm going to do this magic trick with YouTube. So, it's going to take a while. Do you hear at this tempo, dum, dee da dee da? It's not dum, dee da dee dum, dum, dee da dee. It's not on pulse. So, and if you start accumulating a lot of these, I know it can be stylized and I know it can be pushed and pulled, but overall we dissolve the effect of the pulse, I think. And there's other instances. I think the Villalobos is a really nice instance of an example of holding down. Where is it? So it's pretty much on every beat here, right? So boom, cha cha cha, boom pa boom, cha cha cha. You kind of wait on each bass note. That one you didn't. So it's a little bit kind of a thing that's you've gotten used to playing it. I'm exaggerating now. Instead of it's quite a different feel once you let go of that pause. And again, it can be extremely effective at certain moments, like, but then you have to let it go. If you do it on every single measure, it becomes kind of a halting feeling that doesn't let the music sit in a pulse. If you do it at the beginning, cha cha cha, cha, cha cha cha, cha, but then you have to let it go. So it's something that was pretty common throughout your pieces, that there was a tendency to hold, even in the Bach, to a certain extent, not so much in the Bach, but it was there. So something to think about, playing through those beats and making longer lines. I mean, the Villa-Lobos is actually a perfect one for you to work on this. Just sitting in there, and you can use a metronome if you like. You seem to have worked really well with a metronome, so I don't see any problem. I don't think you're going to lose musicality. You're a very musical person. You're not going to lose that by playing with a metronome, but it will help you steady up these pulses. Cha cha cha, cha cha cha, right? Ooh. And then the pulse in general. So that's one aspect I think affects the pulse quite a lot. But the pulse in general, we need a steadier. It's too disconnected from, and that's something that I think you should really work on. All of these are big ticket items, and I think it's important for you to go to the next level. And I sort of know you to a certain extent, and obviously take you on face value about you saying you want to improve and you're looking for things to work on. So this is really important. Now tied in with that, this, as I said, they're all kind of in together, is the tempo choices. We talked about this a little bit yesterday, and your tempo choices are all on the faster end. And just for learning, I would encourage you to pull back a little bit and experiment with a steadier tempo, because again, your tempo in the practice routine was so steady and so effective that I would love to hear that brought into your repertoire. It doesn't mean it's less musical. In fact, I think it makes it more musical, because rhythm and pulse is so integral to musicality, and it translates so well to the listener, because pulse is something that we have since birth. You know, in our mother's heartbeat is the first musical pulse that we get, and that's why scientists argue that we are so connected with beat. And so that regular pulse will just add so much to your music. I don't ever fear that you'll not have the musicality in your phrasing and your tone, but the pulse is not absent, but just not as consistent as it could be to give to the music. So yeah, there's rushing. So let me see. Even those yum, dee-da-dee-dum, you know, yum, ba-ba-ba-bum, ba-ba. It's much slower. It's much easier to play, and we'll let the notes speak instead of bum, da-da-da-dun, da-da-da-da-dum. Part of the rushing feeling comes from the synchronization. If we don't hear the notes speak properly, instead of da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, it's more ga-ga-ga-ga. We get this kind of feeling of unsettled placement, which I, again, sorry to keep harping on it, but I got that in the practice routine. I really did. So it's something to think about, slowing down so notes are clearer. There. Lovely ending there, yeah. So those are my big points that I'd like you to work on. Adding in vibrato and working on the vibrato as well. Synchronization between left and right hand, really working. I mean, I would look at the synchronization in a repertoire context, because I hear it. I think that the speed trials you did in the practice routine, it was still maybe a bit of clickingness at the higher tempi, which you might want to look a little bit at placement and just angle of attack, but it's a minor detail compared to letting the notes speak. But letting those notes speak is tied into the pulse, which is tied into sometimes waiting too much on the downbeats, and then your tempo choices and the tendency to rush. Okay, this was an interesting one as well in terms of pulse. You had a really nice pulse established at the beginning. Now, so this is actually a really nice example and be nice for you to hear. So I'm going to play it and we're going to take it down again. This is nice. This has got a good feel. We want to keep this for the whole first section. Now, keep the pulse. We lose it. The 16th notes get too fast, and then the movement down to the bass. So I encourage you to go to YouTube, go down the little cog that says, in this case, HD, and then check playback speed. That was at 0.5. You could put it even slower and check it. Early. Both rush. That's an interesting one to. So feel the beat when you're listening back. You go boom da 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 dee da 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 dee. You rush on those parts. So the funny thing is, to play this at your tempo, it's slower than you're playing. You're playing faster than your tempo. So it's not about your tempo selection as much as it is you rush through the shorter durations, those 16th notes. And believe me, because I know this from my own experience, I am not a rhythmic player. I've been fighting to get more rhythmic over the years. Evita has been a great help because she's got a great rhythmic sense. But not rushing in those moments makes a world of difference in the overall feel of the piece. David Russell and John Williams are really good examples of players that play quite fast tempi, but it does not sound fast. There's a very big difference between sounding fast and in time and fast and rushed. They're completely different listening experiences to the audience. So that's what I'd like you to look at. So I hope, I don't want to, I sometimes go in on the things I want to address so much instead of spending time pointing out all the great things. I really like your tone. I think you have a beautiful tone. I think you have a very nice sense of general musicality. I think that you have great concentration and memorization, and your technique is excellent, as was evident in the practice routine. I think you have a great enthusiasm and integrity in the way you approach music, and that comes across very clearly always. So all of these things are brilliant. And but if I were your teacher, then we're working like we are kind of, right? But if we're working together one-on-one and you said, okay, tell me what to do, my suggestion, because you're such a great player and I want to see you get to the next level, my suggestion would be to spend the next 6 to 12 months working on these pieces and bringing them up to a level that is the next step. And that would be calming the tempo down, making clarity, clear notes, and bringing out the voices. I think you have a good sense for discovering the music and bringing that out by yourself. Like, we can obviously talk about it in the coaching calls and things, but I'd love to see these get polished. And often pieces that we learn and then play, we can play through. That's the first step in their evolution. The next steps are going to be like just that right hand alone section for the Scarlatti and changing that fingering, and then getting a really nice staccato on that note instead of maybe a bit more of an aggressive one. Getting this passage here in the piazzolla really yump, bump, 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 da, 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 really in the pocket rhythmically. Getting vibrato on passages throughout, Capriccio Arabe. Not rushing in some of the expressive moments. Taking time. All these things are yet to be fully fleshed out, and I know they're in you. What you need is more time to work on these. So that would be my advice as a teacher, because I've gone through this. I've very much been in your position. The person who took me through a lot of this was Raphael, and I was playing a lot of pieces in my first year of undergrad, and they were all there, but none of them were polished. And he took every single piece away except for this one piece by Richard Charlton, and he just made me play that. That was it for months. But I got it polished, and that was a transformative moment for me, and that's what I wish for you, which is that next level. So I'm very happy, of course, to award you the grade 8 certificate. I think you've excelled at the technical routine. You've done an excellent job with the repertoire. I'm just talking about what I would suggest personally for you to improve, to take your playing further, which I know you do. I think you have a deep interest in this. So that would be my advice, is to give yourself 6 to 12 months. I'm personally happy to see you not resubmit this, but I don't want to, the practice routine doesn't need hearing again, but I'd love to hear you play the same set 6 months from now. It might be a nice goal, and I will review it. Again, I'm happy to take the time, because I really want to see that progression in your pieces. It's not about getting the piece of paper or the PDF. It's about taking these pieces to their next level, and therefore taking your playing to the next level. That's what I suggest. I humbly suggest. But thank you, Magdalena, for your time, your effort, and your contribution. Congratulations on your grade 8 certificate. It's the first one. Yay. All right. I'll see you soon. Bye.